A government budget can sound compassionate, but it can still damage the economy because intentions don't change behavior. Incentives do. And when you actually start analyzing the incentives and the risks inside the BC budget, the economic risks seem very hard to ignore. In her speech on February 18th, the BC Finance Minister said that the province is facing a lot of challenges, even though it has many strengths. And that may sound reassuring, but the biggest risk facing the BC economy is not foreign policy. It isn't demographics. It isn't interest rates. It's not global trade. The biggest risk in the British Columbia economy is government policy. Because when you strip away the messaging and start looking at the policies and the incentives that are being created behind it, this budget systematically increases the cost of investing, living, doing business, and getting things accomplished in this province. And economies respond to incentives, not intentions. So in today's video, I want to touch on 4 distinct topics. What this budget is doing economically, what the deficit really means and what it looks like, why benefit promises are harder for politicians to accomplish, and why modern political language is replacing causal economic analysis. So let's dive into what this budget actually does talk about. Some of the highlights of this budget include higher taxes, limiting certain mining expenses, expanding PST coverage such as professional services are now included with PST, increases to the speculation and vacancy taxes, higher school taxes on homes worth more than $3 million, increases to rural property taxation, and higher interest costs on deferred property tax. And to top it all off, roughly a $13.8 billion deficit. Now, the economy isn't going to react to each of these highlights individually. It's going to be looking at the entire incentive structure collectively. This budget is raising the cost of private sector economic activity across almost every channel and every industry. So when earning costs more money, when investing costs more money, and when building costs more money, the economy is going to slow down. Now, the truth of the matter is that every advanced economy on the planet runs on a system of capital formation, not consumption, not redistribution, but the ability for private individuals to save their extra money and formulate a pool of capital that they can use to invest or build in their own mind, and that will reach their own economic goals. This means new housing, new businesses, new production, but this budget pressures those drivers of the economy. A lot of these measures aren't taxes on past wealth, it's taxes on future wealth, future growth, future prosperity and production. And when you tax future production, capital doesn't put their protest signs up and go down to the legislature. It relocates because capital is mathematical. It flows to where the risk-adjusted returns are the highest. Essentially, it goes to where it's treated fairly. So let's move into the deficit, because the justification for deficits are always positioned as compassionate. But economically, a deficit only means 3 things to be true. Number 1, the truth about taxation is going to increase in the future. The truth about number 2 is that it will lead to future inflationary pressure. The government will have to get into more debt just to be able to pay the interest on the debt, and monetary expansion follows. And the third truth is that services are going to be curtailed in the future, and we're seeing that in this budget. There is no fourth option. Government can try and change the timing, but it can't change its own consequences. And furthermore, they can't change the arithmetic. Now, in California, which has been much lauded as one of the worst economies over the last 10 years in the United States, has a budget deficit of about $18 billion. That seems really gross, really big, but when you put it in the context of the population, California has a population of almost 40 million people. And that means not per taxpayer, but by per person analysis, the deficit is $454 per person. Now let's contrast that with British Columbia, which has a population of about 5.6 million people, and this year's deficit is pegged to be about $13.8 billion. Now that's almost $2,500 per person, which is about 5 times what the per person deficit is in California. Now, to be fair, the difference between California and British Columbia is pretty large. Geography, structure, diversification, demographics, and revenue supply, with many large corporations headquartering in California. So this isn't a direct one-to-one comparison, and it's not fair to do so. But the per capita numbers really do show a relative pressure in British Columbia compared to the state of California. Now, we're already starting to see what happens when an immovable object is being hit by an unstoppable force. That is, when political promises hit the wall of political reality. It's been reported that the province's $10 a day daycare is being suspended to new entrants. And this really highlights a broader economic truth. Government policies are very easy to introduce, but they're very difficult to financially sustain. Because once a specific program exists, the people who benefit from that program start rearranging their affairs in order to adapt to it. They adjust their family budget, they adjust their work habits, they adjust their housing decisions. And when the government removes that benefit in the future, it doesn't seem like a policy correction, it feels like something has been stripped away from those people benefiting from those policies. Now, there's an old observation, it's a social law, if you will, called Parkinson's Law. And Parkinson's Law basically says this: a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. Now, this applies very strongly to public policies and political promises. Once citizens start receiving a benefit, they start including it in their baseline psychological expectations. And if fiscal limits or fiscal unaffordability is driving the government to change those benefits, restrict, or remove them, public anger isn't really directed at the flaws of the original policy, it's directed at the removal. Now, this creates a highly dangerous political cycle. Politicians are gaining approval or winning votes by introducing new benefits, and their successors face backlash when they threaten to remove them or actually do. And all the while, the governments are growing the deficit, trying to defer or delay the fiscal responsibility of suspending or stopping something that is totally unsustainable. And this is because the math hasn't changed, but the psychology has. Now, here's another and serious issue with the budget. And of course, this is a nonpartisan issue, is that modern budgets have been introduced with moral language instead of proving causal demonstration. You'll hear a politician say, protecting our community or keeping our families safe, protecting government services like healthcare or education. These phrases signal intention, but intentions are not an economic variable. On the one hand, humans trust moral signals, and on the other hand, economies respond to incentives. Now, all this leads to more intervention in the economy. And Ludwig von Mises warned many years ago that interventionism is not a stable middle system between the free market, the unhampered free market, and communism or socialism. Because when governments intervene in the economy, the incentives start to distort. Supplies shift and investment moves. And these unintended consequences or effects are always blamed on the market. And sadly, they're used to justify the next set of interventionist policy. Bad policy and bad governance rarely arrives with sweeping socialism. It arrives as a small intervention to fix the previous one. We have to remember that BC is not competing economically in isolation. It's competing for its share of the global economy. And when policies are introduced that raises the friction on capital, capital's just simply going to move away. And that's quietly at first, and then all of the sudden, all of it. So yes, British Columbia does face some significant challenges. But as I said before, the biggest pressure or challenge is not externalities. It's internal government policies. Because in economics, intentions don't determine economic outcomes. Incentives do. And incentives always win. If you found this video to be helpful in your journey of economics, philosophy, politics, financial literacy, and history, make sure you hit a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos.